Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to my tutorial on markers. Today I'm just going to be talking about the distress markers, the Stampin' Up! Markers, and some Copic markers. So the difference between these markers, these are both water-based and these are alcohol-based. So these will blend really well on paper, and that's the main reason why you would get Copic markers. These two are both water-based. First thing I'm going to do is kind of open these up and show you. So this is Stampin' Up! These cannot be refilled, but these can. So this has two tips. One is a brush tip. It just goes on really thick. And the other is the fine tip, which you can write with. Okay, I don't need to zoom in on that. Okay, and so this is the Stampin' Up! And then this is the distress marker, again, two tips. This one makes a little bit of noise. It's a little firmer, I think, on the tip. And it comes out a little thicker. And then you have the fine tip. This is Tim Holtz. Okay, so here you can see that the Stampin' Up! Is actually a little crisper, little finer than the Tim Holtz one. And I think it's because the Tim Holtz distress markers have a little bit more water in them than the Stampin' Up! Ones. So that's how they compare when you write with them on paper. Okay, another thing that I do with markers is I color the stamps with them. So if you don't want to buy a whole bunch of ink pads, you can actually color stamps just like you would with an ink pad with the marker. So I usually use the brush tip. So I'm going to do the Stampin' Up! One first, and I kind of angle it down so I get a really thick line. And I just color the whole thing. You can take your time. It's okay if it dries because you're going to reactivate the ink. So once I get it all covered, I'm going to huff on it to re-moisten the ink, and then I'm going to stamp it down. Okay? Now let me clean that. Okay, and then I'm going to repeat this with the distress. And I tried to use the same kind of color here. And I also have a ink comparison video if you want to check that out. Okay, same thing here. You don't have to worry about it drying because you're just going to reactivate it. I'm going to huff on it and stamp. Okay, let me label these. Okay, I'll show you. Okay, so the Tim Holtz is a little, not quite as even coverage, but that's typical for how the distress inks work. But I actually have a lot of Stampin' Up! Markers that I don't have ink pads in, and I just use the markers to color my stamps. So for every ink pad there's the same color marker, and also the same color cardstock and all that. So that's how they work directly onto the paper. Now I want to show you how they color directly on the paper when you have an image that you've stamped. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually, let me see if I can zoom in again. Okay. So I'm going to do this first one in Stampin' Up! And I'm not going to worry too much about this little thing here. I'm just going to color right over it, just so you can see how these apply. Now I'm working on Nina Solar White cardstock. And I don't really do this very often, color directly an image like this, because it's kind of uneven. As you can see, there's light areas and dark areas. So where you've covered over ink that's already been laid on the paper, you'll get a darker line. And plus, I don't like how dark it is. But just to show you, see, as I go over it, it gets darker and darker and kind of uneven. Now the distress has more water in it. So it actually is going to pill up your paper a little bit more than the Stampin' Up! And what I mean by that is kind of the top layer of your paper starts to come off and get like kind of balled up there on the top. not a lot, but as you can see, if I go over it again, it gets darker and it starts to pill up, and you're getting, see those little dots right there? Those dots are where the paper has already started to come up a little bit. But anyway, as you can see, not great even coverage, but this is kind of a big area and not how you would generally color, but just so you can see how they work. Now the Copics, on the other hand, I'm going to color one with just one color. So they go on very smooth, and it doesn't matter if you overlap them, everything blends out so that it becomes very, very even. So this is the kind of marker you would want if you're going to be coloring big areas like this. Okay, so as you can see, I didn't have to go over anything twice, and when I when I overlapped it, it didn't create darker spots, maybe just a little bit in that center there, and I could color it. With Copics, as you color again, the whole thing becomes darker. But you can see how smooth that goes on. Another thing about Copics is that it goes through your paper. So if you're going to be creating a card, you want to make sure that you have a layer underneath this, so when a person opens it, they don't see that mess. Now the real reason why people buy Copics is because they like the blended dimensional look that you get. So I'll show you how that works. I have 3 shades here. One is RV13, RV14, and R29. I'm going to start with my lightest color. Again, I'm just ignoring that little light spot in the balloon. Color the whole thing. This one actually looks like it needs a little bit of a refill, which is really easy to do. Okay, so I do an all over light, and then I'm going to take my darkest, which is an R29. There's a Copic tutorial on my blog. If you go to the top menu, it'll say tutorials, and then you'll see it. So I'm going to do the shadow areas with my darkest color. Okay, then I'm going to go to the medium. And I'm going to do, what I do is I do kind of baby circles. And I just color right over the line. And what this is doing is it's pushing the color away from the marker. And blending the two colors together. And then I'm going to come back in with that first color I started with, the lightest, and do that same technique, kind of baby circles around the line. Okay, so you can see it looks a lot better than the markers, and that's the reason why you would get Copics, is to do something like that. Okay, so another thing you can do is watercolor. So you're not going to be watercoloring with Copics, you're going to be watercoloring with these two. So I'll show you how that works. The first one I'll do is Stampin' Up, and what I do, you can use a brush or you can use an aqua painter. An aqua painter is just it's a paintbrush. This is just a regular brush, and there's water in here in the reservoir, and you squeeze it, the water comes out. So you could do that, or you can just use a brush and a cup of water. So you'll take your brush tip and just apply some. I have a craft mat here, and I'm just going to dip it in here. You can see the water start to blend with it, and then I'm going to apply it. I'm using watercolor paper. You can use regular paper. In fact, I do a lot, but only if I kind of have small areas to color, because the water, if there's too much water, it starts to pill up the paper, which is kind of what we saw with the distress marker on the Nina Solar White cardstock. Anyway, so you can put another layer in to get a darker shadow, and just kind of, you can keep applying until you get it the way you want to. Okay. I usually wipe it off a little bit if I get too much ink on it, And then you can always start over and blend it in there. So you can see how great it blends when you have watercolor paper. It doesn't blend quite as well with regular cardstock. So I'm going to again come in there. The more water you use, the lighter the color is going to be. So I use less water to do these shadow areas. And so it gives you a nice dimension. That's with the Stampin' Up. And so you can do this watercolor technique with both Stampin' Up and Distress. You can see Distress, it's got so much water in it, it's already balling up. It's hard to do it with this. So I'm going to get my ink there, and it's going to work pretty much the same way. And this is a really quick, easy way to get something colored. And I like how it's just lighter than these colors right here that we colored in. So like when I'm doing my scrapbooking and I'm coloring in letters, I always color them in using either a blender pen, I'll show you that in a second, or an aqua painter. And with aqua painter you just wipe it off and it comes off. Now if you look closely, the distress markers are really known for working great with water. You have a little bit of a water stain here on the Stampin' Up! Ones, but you don't get that with the distress markers. I could go back in here and sort of blend it in and try that a few more times and see if I can get that water stain to go away. That just may be because I had too much water on my brush, but these distress markers are made to work with water. So that's the watercoloring. Another technique with the water, with both, is to color directly onto the cardstock and then blend with the water. So I'll show you how that works. You color onto the cardstock like this with your marker, and then you come in with your aqua painter and you blend it out where the line is. Kind of pull that color out. Apply a little bit more on this side. And this is a nice way of getting a really nice shadow because it makes it really super dark. Okay, that's the Stampin' Up. Now I'll do that same thing with the Distress. And you can compare these two. So notice I start in the white area, okay, and then I move towards the color. And you'll notice that the distress markers, that line that the marker has made on the paper pretty much disappears. And it disappears pretty quickly. So I don't really get a harsh line where I drew my marker, because it's very water-based, those markers. Okay, and then I go to the center where I'm going to have less. So if I show this to you up close, you'll be able to see how pretty the distress marker made this balloon, and that we have, you know, dark, but it doesn't look like a line, whereas the Stampin' Up, it kind of looks like a line. I could see a line right there. It's kind of dark light, whereas this more is a fade that goes almost similar to the, well, not exactly, but here's my Copic, so you can compare. You get a much more vibrant color with the Copic because it's maintaining all the color. It's not diluted by anything. Okay, and then one more thing I want to show you is a blender pen. A blender pen has something. I've always wondered what it was, and I always forget to look it up, but there's some kind of chemical inside this little pen here that allows you to blend ink. And I'm going to do this again on some watercolor paper because it works best on this paper. And I did a tutorial a while back on how to make Stampin' Up! Markers look like Copic markers, and this is the technique that I used. And And you could do the same thing I did with the watercolor, where I colored here and I pulled it with the blender pen, or I used the aqua painter, but you could pull it up with the blender pen and color it right onto here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and color it like this. And then I'm going to use my blender pen to blend it out. And I think the Stampin' Up! Markers do a pretty good job with this technique. But I would venture to guess, and I have not tried it, that the Tim Holtz Distress Markers do a great job. And when you're using the Stampin' Up!, I would do it in little pieces, little sections, because you don't want your marker to dry on your paper before you have a chance to blend it. Now this is a very big area, this balloon, so I would use this kind of technique when I had like small flowers. And I'm going to put a little bit more down here, and then I'm going to pull it out. I don't want to color directly into my lighter area because it's going to make that way too dark. So I just kind of have to pull things out slowly. So there you go. And then with the blender pen, all you have to do is, I'll just do it right here, you just go like that, and the ink comes off it, and you can start over. So that's Stampin' Up!, and then let's try the Distress Marker. Yeah, you can see it definitely blends a little bit better. I try to use little circles and blend it out. That looks really good, actually. I think it's a little bit darker with the Stampin' Up! In the shadow areas, and that's because I haven't pulled, like right now I'm pulling all the color out, whereas the Stampin' Up! Didn't really, it dried a little bit before I had a chance to do that, so not all the color got pulled out, which is why it kind of pools in the side here. Anyway, so let me show you how these two compare. So there you have it. Anyway, so in summary, I think Stampin' Up! Markers are great because they match everything. So they match all of their embellishments, match the inks, the cardstock, and everything else. I think if you're going to be doing direct coloring, they color slightly better than the Distress Markers. That's because they're not, the Distress Markers are more about water and techniques with water. So when you look at these other things that we've done, all with water or some type of liquid that's going to spread your ink around, the Distress Marker is definitely nicer for shading and that sort of thing. So if you're looking to be a little bit more artistic, then the Distress Markers are a nice way to go. Or of course, if you want to move to Copics, that's a whole nother level. And I totally love my Copics, but you can kind of get addicted to them, and they are pretty expensive. The Stampin' Up! Markers, I think they're $3.95 or something like that a marker. I don't know, don't quote me. And the Distress Markers are a little bit less than that. So anyway, none of them are really cheap, but it just depends on how you're going to use them. And anyway, so I hope that helps, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.